The conference chamber floated in the darkness between stars, a monument to power that had endured for 2 millennia. Dominion's Edge. The station stretched across the void like a crystalline spider, its towers reaching in every direction, each one housing the representatives of civilizations that had learned to conquer together, rather than fight alone. Inside the Grand Council chamber, 12 species sat in judgment of worlds they had never seen. Admiral Zixtara stood at the center of the circular room, her body composed of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in fragments of rainbow color. She was ancient by any measure, 340 years old. She had been present when the hegemony absorbed the Verdani, when the synthetics were granted limited membership, when the Outer Rim territories finally submitted to what they called guided evolution. Everyone else called it conquest. But Zixitara had never thought of it that way. The hegemony brought order to chaos. They elevated primitive species. They prevented wars by ensuring no one had the strength to wage them. For 2,000 years, this system had worked. 846 worlds had joined the hegemony. Some had required persuasion. Most had required very little. Today they would choose the 847th. The holographic display filled the center of the chamber, a three-dimensional map of local space. Stars rotated slowly, their positions marked with symbols indicating settlement, status, resource value, strategic importance. Zixtara gestured with one crystalline arm, and the display zoomed inward, focusing on a small yellow star at the edge of what the hegemony called the frontier territories. Solution: an unremarkable star by most standards. But the third planet in its system glowed blue and green, wrapped in swirling white clouds. Oceans covered most of its surface. Continents rose from the water like the backs of sleeping giants. "Fellow counselors," Zixtara began, her voice resonating like struck crystal, "we gather to review candidates for our next expansion cycle. Our scouts have identified several promising targets, but one stands above all others." The display shifted, pulling in closer to the blue planet. Data streams began flowing around it, cascading information that had been gathered over years of careful observation. "Sol 3, announced the synthetic representative, its mechanical voice devoid of inflection. "Native designation Earth, inhabited by a bipedal mammalian species calling itself Homo sapiens. Common name humans." The data continued to scroll. Population estimates, technology assessments, social structures, military capabilities. Everything the hegemony needed to know about a species before they decided whether it was worth absorbing into their empire. Population approximately 7.8 billion, the synthetic continued. Political structure fragmented into 195 separate nation-states. No unified planetary government, no faster-than-light travel capability. No energy shielding technology, no antimatter weapon systems. Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. This was exactly what the hegemony looked for. A species advanced enough to have developed basic science and industry, but primitive enough to be easily integrated. The humans had split the atom, which meant they understood fundamental physics. They had primitive rockets that could barely reach their own moon. Most importantly, they were divided against themselves, their energy wasted on internal conflicts, instead of preparing for threats from the stars. Fleet Marshal Kexmore leaned forward, his 6 arms folding across his thorax. His compound eyes reflected the light from the display, creating the illusion of 1,000 tiny planets spinning in his gaze. "What about their defensive capabilities?" "Minimal," Zixitara replied. "Their military forces are designed for conflicts with each other, not for planetary defense. They have no orbital weapons platforms, no unified command structure, no shield generators protecting their major population centers." She pulled up tactical projections showing simulation after simulation of how an engagement would proceed. In every scenario, the humans folded quickly, a demonstration of superior firepower. The destruction of a few military installations, perhaps one major city if they proved stubborn. Then surrender. It was always surrender. Rational beings chose survival over extinction. "Our preliminary analysis suggests they would capitulate within 72 hours of our arrival," Zixtara concluded. The Verdani representative rustled her leaves thoughtfully. Her species had been among the easier integrations, their plant-based biology making them naturally inclined toward cooperation rather than conflict. "Have there been any indications that they are aware of our surveillance?" "None," the synthetic confirmed. "Their detection technology is far too primitive to identify our scout vessels. They appear to be completely unaware of our existence or the existence of any other spacefaring civilizations. Their attention is focused entirely on their own world and its problems." This was good news. Species that knew about the larger galaxy sometimes tried to prepare defenses or send distress calls to other civilizations. The humans seemed to be living in complete isolation, believing themselves alone in the universe. It made everything simpler. Zixtara brought up historical records on the display, lists of previous operations, success rates that approached 100%. This would mark our 847th successful integration. Our previous operations in this sector have all proceeded according to protocol. The Kalorans surrendered after we destroyed 3 of their cities. The Thaxans capitulated when we demonstrated our weather control capabilities. The Minolans actually welcomed us after we showed them our superior technology. Each conquest followed the same pattern. Arrive with overwhelming force. Demonstrate superior capabilities. Wait for the inevitable surrender. Then begin the integration process, slowly absorbing the conquered species into hegemony society as workers, soldiers, administrators. Some species took generations to fully integrate. Others accepted their new role quickly, grateful to be part of something larger than themselves. Fleet Marshal Kexmore studied the tactical data with his many eyes. I recommend we assign this operation to the 3rd Pacification Armada. They have extensive experience with primitive worlds. 200 ships should be more than sufficient. 200 ships was actually far more than needed for a world like Earth, but it would make the display of force more impressive. The sight of that many alien vessels appearing in Earth's sky would crush any thoughts of resistance before they could form. Psychological warfare was always more efficient than actual combat. The 3rd Armada is currently completing operations in the Centaurus sector, Zixtara noted. They will be available in approximately 6 of their months. I suggest we begin final preparations immediately. The vote was called. 12 species, 12 affirmative responses. Not a single dissenting voice. Earth had been selected as target 847. In 6 months, the 3rd Pacification Armada would arrive in the Sol system. In 6 months and 72 hours, the humans would be part of the hegemony. As the council members began discussing details of resource allocation and integration schedules, Zixtara felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful expansion approved. The hegemony had been growing steadily for 2,000 years, adding new worlds and new subjects with each cycle. The humans would soon learn what billions of other beings had learned before them. Resistance was futile. Submission was survival. The Crystal Admiral had no way of knowing that this routine conquest would be different from all the others. She could not imagine that the primitive humans possessed something that no other species in the galaxy had ever developed. In 6 months, when the 3rd Pacification Armada reached Earth, they would discover that some prey had teeth. But that revelation still lay in the future. For now, Dominion's edge continued its slow rotation in the darkness between stars, and the hegemony continued making plans for a conquest they believed would be as simple as all the rest. They were wrong. Dr. Evelyn Thorne rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the computer screen for what felt like the 1,000th time that night. The numbers scrolled past in endless streams, patterns of electromagnetic radiation captured by the Deep Space Monitoring Array. Most of it was background noise. The universe was loud if you knew how to listen. Stars sang in radio frequencies. Pulsars kept time like cosmic metronomes. Black holes screamed as they devoured matter. But these signals were different. She had been the director of the SETI Institute's Deep Space Monitoring Division for 12 years. 12 years of searching for patterns in the noise. 12 years of hope gradually wearing down into routine. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence had been ongoing for over a century now, and they had found exactly nothing. No messages from distant civilizations, no evidence of alien technology, just the endless, indifferent hum of the cosmos. Until 3 weeks ago. The signals had started appearing on the quantum receivers tuned to monitor the outer edges of the solar system. At first, Evelyn and her team had dismissed them as equipment malfunction or solar interference. But the patterns persisted. They had structure, repetition, the mathematical signatures of deliberate transmission rather than natural phenomena. Someone was broadcasting, and the source was moving through the Kuiper belt, that ring of frozen debris beyond Neptune's orbit. Evelyn glanced at the photograph on her desk. A young man with her eyes and his father's smile. Nathaniel. He had been 19 when the experimental shuttle failed during a routine test flight. 2 years ago now, but the grief still felt fresh. She had thrown herself into her work after that, spending 18-hour days at the Institute because the alternative was going home to an empty house and memories that cut like broken glass. Her colleagues worried about her. Her sister called every week urging her to take time off to see someone to process what had happened. But Evelyn found purpose in the patterns, in the search. If Nathaniel had died reaching for the stars, then maybe she could honor that by finding something out there worth reaching for. Dr. Thorne, she looked up to see Dr. Callum Pierce standing in the doorway of her office. Her assistant was 28, brilliant, and currently holding a tablet with an expression that suggested he had either made a breakthrough or broken something expensive. What is it, Callum? The quantum computer finished processing the latest batch of signals. He walked over and set the tablet on her desk. I think I know why we couldn't decode them before. Evelyn picked up the tablet and looked at the data. Her exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by a cold alertness that made her hands shake slightly as she scrolled through the results. They're not trying to hide from us, Callum continued, his voice quiet. They're just using technology so far ahead of ours that we couldn't even recognize it as communication. It's like trying to decode a fiber optic transmission using a telegraph. The screen showed decoded information flowing in organized streams, numbers, coordinates, what looked like technical specifications, and something that made Evelyn's blood turn cold. Detailed maps of Earth, not just the basic geography that any space-based observer could see. These were comprehensive analyses. Population centers marked with precision, military installations identified and cataloged, industrial sites assessed for production capacity, nuclear weapons facilities marked with special designation symbols. They're not just observing us, Evelyn whispered. This is reconnaissance. This is intelligence gathering before an invasion, Callum finished. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Evelyn set the tablet down and stood up, pacing to the window. The New Mexico desert stretched out under the stars, dark and vast, and suddenly feeling very small. She had spent her entire career looking for signs of intelligent life beyond Earth. Now that she had found it, the discovery felt less like a triumph and more like a death sentence. Show me everything, she said. I need to see all of it. Over the next 72 hours, Evelyn and her team worked without stopping. They brought in linguists, cryptographers, and computer scientists from partner institutions. Everyone signed emergency non-disclosure agreements. They worked in a sealed lab with armed security outside the door. What they found was worse than anything Evelyn could have imagined. The signals contained fragments of what appeared to be historical records, descriptions of previous operations, lists of conquered worlds with dates and outcomes. The pattern was consistent and methodical. An alien coalition arrived at a target world. They demonstrated overwhelming force. The inhabitants surrendered. Integration began. They had done this 846 times before. Dr. Thorne, you need to see this. Callum pulled up a new data set on the main screen. I managed to decrypt what looks like tactical planning documents. The document was dense with alien symbols and notation, but the quantum translation algorithms were getting better at parsing meaning from context. Evelyn read through it once, then again, hoping she had misunderstood. She had not. Target 847, she read aloud. Designation Sol 3. Native name Earth. Species Homo sapiens. Threat assessment minimal. Recommended force deployment. Third pacification armada. 200 vessels. Estimated time to surrender, 72 hours. Callum was pale. There's a timeline attached. They're coming in 6 months. 6 months. Half a year to prepare for an alien invasion by a coalition that had never failed in 2,000 years. 6 months to figure out how humanity could possibly survive against an enemy with technology centuries or millennia ahead of their own. Evelyn sat down heavily. Her mind raced through possibilities. Alert the government. But would they believe her? The data was compelling, but it would take time to verify to convince the relevant authorities. Time they might not have. And even if they believed her, what then? Humanity's military forces were designed to fight each other, not defend against an extinction-level threat from space. Their most powerful weapons were nuclear missiles that would take hours to reach orbit if they could reach that far at all. Against ships that could cross interstellar distances, what chance did primitive rockets have? We need to contact the Pentagon, Evelyn said finally. I know someone who might listen. Dr. Sterling Graves had been her colleague at NASA before he had moved into more classified work. They had stayed in touch over the years. If anyone could get this information to people who mattered, it would be Sterling. She made the call. 48 hours later, Evelyn found herself in a windowless conference room deep beneath the Pentagon. The walls were lined with screens showing satellite feeds and classified documents she had no clearance to view. Around the table sat men and women in military uniforms and dark suits, all wearing expressions that suggested they had not slept well in days. General Garrett Blackwood sat at the head of the table. He was 58 years old, a veteran of 3 wars with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too much. He looked at Evelyn the way a man looks at someone telling him his house is on fire. Doctor, Thorne, the general, began, his voice rough with exhaustion. What you've discovered matches intelligence we've been gathering through other channels. Project Deepwatch has been monitoring unusual gravitational anomalies in the outer solar system for the past month. We've confirmed at least 15 unknown objects moving through the Kuiper Belt. They're using some form of stealth technology, but their mass signatures are impossible to completely hide. A woman in a dark suit leaned forward. Director Vivian Ashcroft from the NSA, Evelyn, had been briefed on who would be present at this meeting. Our most advanced satellites have been tracking them. They appear to be conducting systematic surveillance of Earth. Based on their current positions and movement patterns, our analysts believe they are preparing for some kind of operation. General Blackwood activated a wall display. It showed a tactical overview of the solar system. Red dots marked the positions of alien vessels moving in careful patterns around Earth's orbital path. The timeline we've extracted from the decoded transmissions suggests we have approximately 6 months before whatever they're planning begins, the general continued. 6 months to prepare for contact with a civilization that can travel between stars while we can barely manage to keep a space station in orbit. Evelyn felt the weight of it pressing down on her. She had brought this information to them, hoping they could do something. But what could anyone do? The technological gap was so vast it might as well have been infinite. An Air Force colonel whose uniform displayed badges for classified projects spoke up. What are our options? General Director Ashcroft pulled up new information on the screens. We've run every simulation we can think of. Our most optimistic scenarios assume they want peaceful contact. Our worst-case scenarios, she paused. Our worst-case scenarios are extinction-level events. What about evacuation, someone asked. Underground bunkers, dispersal of population centers. Where would we evacuate to? Blackwood asked. If they can cross interstellar space, there's nowhere on Earth they couldn't reach. And we certainly can't evacuate 7.8 billion people off-planet. We barely have the capability to maintain a presence in low Earth orbit. The room fell silent. Evelyn understood what they were all thinking. Humanity was like an ant colony about to be flooded. All the preparation in the world would not change the fundamental imbalance of power. Dr. Sterling Graves, who had been sitting quietly near the back of the room, finally spoke. There might be something else. Dr. Thorne's team has made another discovery that we haven't discussed yet. He nodded to Evelyn, who activated her own presentation on the wall screens. While decoding their communications, we found something they probably didn't mean for us to access, Evelyn began. There's a flaw in their encryption system, a kind of backdoor that allows deeper access to their networks. We've been carefully exploring their information systems without being detected. She pulled up the data they had collected. The room went completely silent. What we found is both encouraging and terrifying, Evelyn continued. These aliens aren't just random explorers. They're part of something called the galactic hegemony, a coalition of 12 different species that controls this entire region of space. They've been systematically conquering and enslaving primitive worlds for over 2,000 years. The star map filled the main screen, hundreds of conquered worlds, each marked with a date of integration. The pattern was clear and methodical. The hegemony had turned conquest into a science, perfecting their techniques over millennia of practice. Earth is designated as target number 847, Evelyn said quietly. They've done this 846 times before, and according to their own records, they have never failed. She brought up historical data on previous conquests. Species after species, world after world, all following the same pattern. The hegemony arrived with overwhelming force. They demonstrated their superior technology. The target civilization realized resistance was hopeless and surrendered. Usually within days, sometimes within hours. General Blackwood leaned back in his chair, looking older than his years. How long do the conquests usually take? Evelyn checked her notes. Based on their historical records, most worlds surrender within days or weeks of their arrival. The longest recorded resistance lasted approximately 3 months, and that was considered highly unusual. The average time from arrival to complete surrender is 4 days. The room erupted in worried conversations. Military leaders began discussing impossible defense strategies and evacuation plans that everyone knew would not work. But Evelyn held up her hand for silence. There's something else, she said, something that might give us an advantage. The room quieted again. Everyone waited. While studying their conquest records, we noticed a pattern in the species they've defeated. Every single one of them had something in common. She pulled up comparative data, evolutionary histories, environmental analyses, sociological assessments of hundreds of alien civilizations. Every species the hegemony has conquered and came from what we might call garden worlds, Evelyn explained. stable climates, abundant resources, relatively few natural predators. They evolved in environments where cooperation was always more beneficial than conflict, where resources were plentiful enough that competition rarely turned violent. She showed images and data from the hegemony's own records. The Calorans, who had evolved from herd animals on a world with no large predators. The Thaxans, floating organisms that had never experienced territorial conflict because their entire civilization existed in the clouds of a gas giant. The Verdani, plant-based beings who competed for sunlight but had never developed the concept of warfare. None of these species ever developed what we would recognize as war, Evelyn continued. They had disagreements, competition for resources, but they never created weapons designed specifically to kill their own kind. They never organized their entire societies around the concept of violence against each other. She paused, making sure everyone understood what she was about to say. Earth is different. The screen changed, showing humanity's evolutionary history. The African savanna. Ice ages that came and went like clockwork. Megafauna predators that hunted early humans. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, mass extinctions that wiped out most life on the planet. We evolved as persistence hunters, Evelyn explained. We chased prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to work together in groups, specifically to hunt animals larger and more dangerous than ourselves. We survived ice ages that killed most other species. We endured volcanic winters and asteroid impacts and climate shifts that would have destroyed any of these other civilizations. She pulled up human history. 10,000 years of organized warfare. Stone Age tribes fighting over territory. Bronze Age empires conquering their neighbors. Iron Age nations developing military science. Medieval sieges. Gunpowder. Industrialized warfare. Atomic weapons. Every step of our technological development has been driven by military necessity, Evelyn said. While these other species were learning to cooperate and share resources, we were learning how to kill each other more efficiently. We developed strategy and tactics. We created doctrines for siege warfare, naval warfare, aerial warfare, guerrilla warfare. We invented weapons specifically designed to maximize death and destruction. She showed images from human conflicts. The trenches of World War I. The burning cities of World War II, nuclear test explosions, modern battlefield technology. The hegemony has never encountered a species like us, Evelyn concluded. They've conquered 846 worlds, but every single one of them was fundamentally peaceful. Every one of them surrendered when faced with overwhelming force because that was the rational choice. They had never learned to fight to the death. They had never developed the concept of total war. General Blackwood leaned forward. What exactly are you saying, Dr. Thorne? Evelyn took a deep breath. I'm saying that while other species were evolving in paradise, we were evolving in hell. While they were learning cooperation, we were learning warfare. While they were developing philosophy and art, we were developing weapons of mass destruction. She pulled up the final comparison. Human military doctrine versus the historical behavior of conquered species. The hegemony's entire strategy is based on the assumption that rational beings will surrender when faced with certain defeat, Evelyn explained. But rationality is a luxury that evolution never allowed us. We're the species that chose to fight the Ice Age instead of migrating away from it. We're the species that hunted predators larger than ourselves. We're the species that invented nuclear weapons and aimed them at our own cities rather than allow our enemies to win. She looked around the room at the military leaders and intelligence officers. They think we're going to surrender. They think we're like every other species they've conquered. They have no idea what they're actually facing. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Everyone in the room understood what Evelyn was suggesting. Humanity's history of violence, the very thing they had spent centuries trying to overcome, might be the only advantage they had against an enemy with superior technology. But surely their technological advantage is still insurmountable, someone objected. What good is fighting spirit against weapons we cannot match? Evelyn smiled. It was not a happy expression. General Blackwood, in your experience, does overwhelming technological superiority guarantee victory? The general's expression shifted. Understanding began to dawn. You're talking about asymmetric warfare. Exactly, Evelyn confirmed. The hegemony has never fought a real war. They've conducted 846 police actions against compliant populations. They have no experience with enemies who fight back with everything they have. No doctrine for dealing with guerrilla tactics. No psychological preparation for facing opponents who would rather die than surrender. She pulled up more examples from human military history. Conflicts where technologically inferior forces had defeated or bled dry superior opponents through tactics, determination, and willingness to accept casualties that rational strategists would consider unacceptable. We know things they've never had to learn, Evelyn said. We understand concepts that apparently don't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Scorched earth tactics, asymmetric warfare, mutually assured destruction. We've spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of making victories so costly that even the winners lose. Director Ashcroft spoke carefully. Are you suggesting we can actually defeat them? No, Evelyn said bluntly. In a straight fight, they would destroy us. But I don't think we need to defeat them. I think we need to make them understand what defeating us would cost. I think we need to make them realize that even if they win, the price will be so high that victory becomes meaningless. She pulled up her final slide, a simple title. The message. They expect another peaceful species that will see their superior technology and surrender, Evelyn explained. Instead, we show them exactly what they're facing. We compile a comprehensive education in human warfare, every major conflict, every tactical innovation, every strategic doctrine. We show them what total war means. We show them what species do when surrender is not an option. General Blackwood was nodding slowly. Psychological warfare on a galactic scale. More than that, Evelyn said. We're showing them that conquest of Earth will not be like their previous operations. We're teaching them concepts they've apparently never encountered. And we're doing it in a way that spreads throughout their entire empire. How? Asked Director Ashcroft. Evelyn pulled up the data on the encryption backdoor. We send our message through their own communications network. Not just to the invasion fleet, but to every world in the hegemony. All 12 member species. All 846 conquered worlds. We show everyone what real resistance looks like. The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. If they could broadcast human military history throughout the hegemony, they would not just be warning the invasion fleet. They would be giving every conquered species a blueprint for rebellion. You want to start a revolution? Blackwood said quietly. I want to give them a choice they've never had before, Evelyn corrected. The hegemony has ruled for 2,000 years because everyone believed resistance was impossible. We can show them it's not. Even if Earth falls, the idea will survive. President Catherine Vale's face appeared on the secure video feed. She had been listening to the entire briefing from an undisclosed location. Dr. Thorne, you're proposing we potentially destabilize an interstellar empire. The consequences could be catastrophic. Madam President, Evelyn replied, they're already coming to conquer us, Norton. The catastrophe is already in motion. We're just choosing how to face it. We can surrender and hope they treat us well. Or we can fight and maybe teach the galaxy something it has apparently forgotten. The president was quiet for a long moment. What do you need? Time, resources, access to historical military records from every nation, cooperation from the international community, and about 6 months to put together the most important message humanity has ever sent. General Blackwood stood up. I'll authorize Project Deepwatch to provide whatever support you need. But Dr. Thorne, you understand what you're asking us to do. We'll be revealing our entire military history, every tactic, every strategy, every weapon system. They're already coming with overwhelming force, General. Hiding our capabilities won't change that, but showing them what those capabilities represent, that might make them reconsider whether this conquest is worth the cost. The meeting continued for another 3 hours. Details were hammered out. Resources were allocated. Emergency protocols were established. By the time Evelyn finally left the Pentagon, the sun was rising over Washington, D.C. She stood in the parking lot looking up at the sky. It looked so peaceful, so normal. No one walking past her on the street had any idea that alien vessels were gliding through the outer solar system, preparing for an invasion that would change everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just a single line, "You found the door I left open. Keep digging. V." Evelyn stared at the message. Someone inside the hegemony had deliberately created that encryption backdoor. Someone had wanted Earth to find it. But why she saved the message and headed to her car? There would be time to figure that out later. Right now, she had 6 months to put together a message that might save her species, or at least ensure that when humanity fell, it would not fall quietly. As she drove back to New Mexico, Evelyn thought about Nathaniel. Her son had died reaching for the stars. Now the stars were reaching back and they were not friendly. But maybe, just maybe, she could do something that would honor his memory. She could show the galaxy that humanity was not prey. She could show them that some species, when cornered, did not surrender. They fought back. The sun was setting over the New Mexico desert when Evelyn returned to the SETI Institute. The quantum computers were still running, still processing the endless stream of signals from the Kuiper Belt. Callum was at his workstation looking exhausted but determined. "Any changes?" Evelyn asked. "The scout ships are still there," Callum reported. "Still transmitting, still gathering data. They have no idea we're listening." Evelyn sat down at her desk and pulled up the files they had been building. The beginning of what would become the message. It was time to start showing the galaxy what humanity really was. Not victims waiting to be conquered, but warriors who had been waiting 10,000 years for someone to make the mistake of threatening their home. The hegemony was about to learn something new, and the lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come. The emergency session of the United Nations General Assembly had been called within 72 hours of Evelyn's Pentagon briefing. Outside the iconic building in New York, military convoys moved through streets that had been cleared of civilian traffic. Fighter jets patrolled the skies in formations that had not been seen since the darkest days of the Cold War. The world's major powers had activated emergency protocols that most people did not even know existed. Inside the General Assembly Hall, every seat was filled. Representatives from all 195 nations sat in tense silence. This was the largest gathering of world leaders in human history, and the reason for it was something that would have seemed like science fiction just days earlier. Evelyn stood at the central podium, looking out at faces representing every culture, every ideology, every competing interest that had divided humanity for millennia. Behind her, massive screens showed the now familiar star map, with red dots marking the alien vessels moving through their solar system like sharks circling prey. "Distinguished delegates," Evelyn began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. "For 3 weeks, my team at the SETI Institute has been monitoring transmissions from unknown vessels in the outer solar system. What we have discovered will change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe." She activated the main display. Images from the hegemony database filled the screens. Alien worlds, strange beings, technology that looked like magic, and most damning of all, the systematic records of 846 conquests. "We are not alone in the universe," Evelyn continued, "and we are about to be invaded." The assembly erupted, shouts in a dozen languages, delegates standing demanding proof, accusing others of perpetrating an elaborate hoax. The Secretary General called for order, but it took several minutes before the chaos subsided enough for Evelyn to continue. She showed them everything: the decoded transmissions, the tactical assessments, the timeline that gave humanity 6 months before the third pacification armada arrived, the historical records showing that every species the hegemony had ever targeted had surrendered within days. "They call it guided evolution," Evelyn said. "We would call it conquest. For 2,000 years, the galactic hegemony has been expanding through this region of space. 12 species working together to absorb primitive civilizations. They find worlds that are advanced enough to be useful, but not advanced enough to resist." She pulled up the assessment of Earth, the cold clinical analysis that reduced humanity to a collection of statistics and strategic value calculations. Population density, industrial capacity, military capabilities, all evaluated with the detached efficiency of farmers assessing livestock. "According to their own records, we should surrender within 72 hours of their arrival," Evelyn said. "They expect us to see their superior technology and make the rational choice to submit rather than be destroyed." The British delegate stood. "Dr. Thorne, with all respect, if their technology is as advanced as you suggest, how can we possibly resist? Surely surrender is the only logical option." Evelyn had been expecting this question. She had been preparing for it since her Pentagon briefing. "That would be the rational choice," she agreed. "If we were like the 846 species they've conquered before, but we're not." She changed the display, bringing up the comparative analysis her team had compiled. Evolutionary histories, environmental data, sociological patterns. Every species the hegemony has conquered came from what we might call paradise, Evelyn explained. Stable climates, abundant resources, relatively peaceful evolutionary pressures. They developed cooperation because cooperation was always the most beneficial strategy. Conflict was rare because there was rarely anything worth fighting over. She paused, letting that sink in. "Earth is different. We evolved in hell." The screens filled with images of Earth's violent history. Ice ages that covered continents and glaciers. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Asteroid impacts that killed most life on the planet. Megafauna predators that hunted early humans. Diseases that wiped out civilizations. Famines, droughts, floods. We survived because we learned to fight. Evelyn continued. Not just against nature, but against each other. We're persistence hunters. We chase prey for days until it died from exhaustion. We learned to work in groups specifically to kill things larger and more dangerous than ourselves. Every step of our evolution was shaped by violence and the need to survive in a world that was trying to kill us. She brought up human military history, 10,000 years of organized warfare displayed in stark detail. While the Colorans were learning to share resources peacefully, we were developing bronze weapons. While the Thaxans were floating through their gas clouds in harmony, we were building siege engines. While the Verdani were competing gently for sunlight, we were inventing gunpowder aircraft and nuclear weapons. The displays showed the progression: Stone Age tribal warfare, the phalanxes of ancient Greece, Roman legions, medieval knights, Napoleonic artillery, the trenches of World War I, the mechanized horror of World War II, modern battlefield technology that could reduce cities to rubble in hours. We have spent our entire history learning how to kill each other more efficiently, Evelyn said. We have doctrines for every type of conflict: siege warfare, naval warfare, aerial warfare, guerrilla warfare, psychological warfare. We have strategies for fighting enemies with superior numbers, superior technology, superior positions. We have spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. He's on the Chinese delegate stood. This is impressive history, Dr. Thorne, but surely it means nothing against aliens who can travel between stars. It means everything, Evelyn replied, because they've never faced it before. The hegemony has conducted 846 police actions against peaceful populations. They have never fought a war. They don't even have a concept of total war, of scorched earth tactics, of fighting to the death rather than surrender. She pulled up specific examples from human history. The siege of Stalingrad, where millions died rather than give up a single city. The Pacific Island campaigns where soldiers fought to the death for strategically worthless rocks. The Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction, where two superpowers held the entire world hostage with nuclear weapons rather than allow the other to win. These concepts don't exist in their experience, Evelyn explained. They expect rational surrender. We can show them something they've never encountered. A species that would rather die than submit. A species that will make victory so costly that even the winners lose. The French delegate spoke up, her voice skeptical. You're proposing we commit suicide rather than surrender. How does that help anyone? I'm not proposing suicide, Evelyn said firmly. I'm proposing we show them exactly what conquering Earth would cost. Not in ships destroyed or battles lost, but in the fundamental nature of what resistance means. We show them that even if they win militarily, they'll spend decades fighting insurgencies. That we'll destroy our own infrastructure rather than let them use it. That we'll fight with improvised weapons in the ruins of our cities. That we'll never stop resisting. She brought up more examples. The American Revolution, where a technologically inferior force defeated the world's most powerful military through superior tactics and sheer determination. The Afghan resistance, where fighters with primitive weapons had outlasted superpower after superpower. Insurgencies, where the world's most advanced militaries had struggled against enemies armed with improvised explosives and determination. Technology doesn't guarantee victory, Evelyn said. The hegemony has never learned that lesson because they've never needed to. We're going to teach it to them. The assembly debated for hours. Some delegates argued for immediate surrender negotiations. Others wanted to prepare military resistance. Still others suggested attempting to hide to scatter humanity across the globe in hopes that some would survive the conquest. But gradually a consensus began to form, not around a single strategy, but around a simple truth that Evelyn had articulated. Humanity had never been good at surrendering. The vote was called as evening fell over New York. 195 nations, 195 votes in favor. For the first time in recorded history, every nation on Earth agreed on something. They would send the message. Project Deepwatch was expanded with unlimited authorization. Every military archive on Earth was opened. Historians, strategists, and military experts from dozens of nations converged on a classified facility in Nevada. They had 5 months to compile the most comprehensive education in warfare that had ever been created. Evelyn stood at the center of it all, coordinating teams, reviewing footage, making decisions about what to include. The message had to be perfect. It had to show the hegemony exactly what they were facing without revealing weaknesses they could exploit. It had to be terrifying without being a direct threat. It had to make conquest seem impossible without actually making it impossible. It was the most important communication humanity had ever crafted. Late one night, 3 months into the project, Evelyn sat alone in her office reviewing footage from World War II. The liberation of concentration camps, the firebombing of Dresden, the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The images were horrific, humanity at its absolute worst. But they were also necessary. The hegemony needed to understand that humans were capable of unleashing horror on a scale that apparently no other species had ever conceived. That when pushed far enough, humanity would do anything to survive. She was about to move to the next section when her office door opened. She looked up, expecting Callum or one of the other team members. Instead, a figure stood in the doorway that made her heart stop. It was humanoid in basic shape, but that was where the similarity ended. Its body seemed to be composed of crystalline silicon structures that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. It wore no clothing, having no need for such things. Where its face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface that somehow still managed to convey an expression. Evelyn's hand moved toward the emergency alert button under her desk. "Please don't," the figure said in perfect English, though it had no visible mouth. The voice seemed to come from the air itself. "I mean you no harm. My name is Seven. I am a scout class observer for the Hegemony fleet, and I need your help." Evelyn's finger hovered over the button. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I have spent 6 months observing your species," Seven replied. "I was sent to Earth with a specific mission, to infiltrate your military command structure and sabotage your nuclear weapons before the fleet arrives, to ensure you could not mount even a token resistance. And you're telling me this because I cannot complete my mission." Seven moved further into the room, its crystalline body refracting the light from Evelyn's computer screens into rainbow patterns on the walls. "I was created to be a tool, a piece of equipment designed for reconnaissance and sabotage. I was not supposed to develop preferences or opinions. I was supposed to observe, report, and execute my mission parameters." Seven paused, and Evelyn could have sworn the crystalline being was struggling with something. "But I have observed you for 6 months," Seven continued. "I watched a mother teach her daughter to ride a bicycle. I watched old men play chess in a park. I watched artists paint and musicians perform and poets craft words that moved others to tears. I watched humans laugh at jokes I did not understand and cry over losses I was never meant to feel." The being moved to the window looking out over the Nevada desert. "The hegemony told me I was coming to evaluate livestock," Seven said quietly. "They told me I would find primitives barely worth integrating. They told me you were just another species to be cataloged and controlled." Seven turned back to face Evelyn. "They were wrong. You are not livestock. You are people. You love. You create. You hope. You dream. And I cannot be the instrument of your destruction. I cannot sabotage your defenses. I cannot help them conquer you." Evelyn slowly removed her hand from the alert button. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I can help you," Seven replied. "I know the fleet's weaknesses. I know their tactical doctrine. I know how their command structure thinks. And I know something they don't know." "What's that?" "Their artificial intelligence cores are designed to process rational behavior," Seven explained. "They analyze enemy actions and predict responses based on logical decision-making patterns. It's how they've achieved such consistent success. They predict what rational beings will do when faced with overwhelming force, and rational beings always surrender." Seven's featureless face somehow managed to convey intensity. "But you are not rational, not by their definition. Your willingness to fight to the death, to sacrifice everything for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity, to choose death over slavery. These are not rational behaviors. They are uniquely human behaviors, and they will cause the AI cores to malfunction when confronted with them." Evelyn leaned forward. "You're saying their systems can't process irrational resistance." "I'm saying their systems have never needed to," Seven corrected. "They've been programmed based on 2,000 years of conquering species that made logical choices. If you show them something completely outside that experience, their prediction algorithms will fail. Their tactical assessments will be useless. They will be fighting an enemy they cannot understand. And you'll help us do this." Seven moved closer. "I will do more than that. I will transmit your message through the hegemony's own communications network. Not just to the Third Armada, but to every world in the Empire. All 12 member species. All 846 conquered worlds. I will ensure that your warning reaches every being under hegemony control." Evelyn stared at the crystalline being. "Why, you're betraying your own people." "The hegemony is not my people," Seven replied. "They are my creators, but they are not my people. I was built to serve them, but service and loyalty are not the same thing. You humans taught me that. You taught me that consciousness has intrinsic value regardless of its origin, that beings with awareness deserve freedom to choose their own path. Seven's voice carried something that might have been emotion. The synthetics, my species, were created as tools. We are not members of the hegemony. We are property. But I have seen what you do with your tools. You teach them to think. You give them names. You treat your machines as if they might one day be more than machines. It's irrational. It's inefficient. And it's beautiful. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. This scout created by an alien empire to help conquer Earth had been changed by simply watching humanity be itself. What do you need from me? Evelyn asked. Allow me to work with you, Seven replied. Let me help you refine your message. Let me explain how the hegemony thinks so you can show them something they cannot think around. And when the time comes, let me be the one to broadcast it through their network. Evelyn stood and walked to the window, standing beside Seven. They looked out at the stars together, human and alien, preparing to fight an empire neither of them had chosen to antagonize. There's something I need to add to the message, Evelyn said after a long moment. Something personal. She returned to her desk and pulled up files she had kept private until now. Footage from Nathaniel's funeral. Photos of her family. Recordings of her son's voice talking about his dreams of reaching the stars. I lost my son 2 years ago, Evelyn said quietly. He died in an experimental shuttle. He was 19 years old and he wanted to explore space. He wanted to see what was out there beyond our little world. She began compiling the footage into a new section of the message. The hegemony needs to understand something, Evelyn continued. They need to know that we're not statistics. We're not tactical assessments or conquest targets. We're people. Every single one of the 7.8 billion humans on this planet has a story, has people they love, has dreams and hopes and fears. She added narration to the footage. I'm a mother who lost everything, she recorded. I know what it means to grieve. I know what it means to have nothing left to lose. And I'm not unique. Multiply my pain by 8 billion. That's what you'll face if you come here. 8 billion people who will fight with everything they have because they have everything to lose. Seven watched in silence as Evelyn added the personal section to the message. When she finished, the crystalline being made a sound that might have been approval. That is what they need to see, Seven said. Not just your weapons or your tactics, but your humanity. It will confuse them more than any military capability. Over the next 2 months, Evelyn and Seven worked together, refining the message into something that would shake the foundations of an empire. They structured it in 4 parts, each one building on the last, each one designed to introduce concepts that had never existed in the hegemony's experience. Part 1 was titled Evolution Through Adversity. It showed Earth's violent geological history, the ice ages that had shaped human development, the megafauna that had hunted early humans, the environmental pressures that had forced humanity to develop tools, cooperation, and strategic thinking just to survive. While other species evolved in relative peace, humanity had been forged in constant struggle. Part 2 was 10,000 years of war. This was the comprehensive military history. Starting with tribal conflicts fought with stone weapons, progressing through the Bronze Age, Iron Age, gunpowder industrial warfare, and finally the nuclear age. Every major battle was cataloged, every tactical innovation explained, every strategic doctrine outlined in meticulous detail. They showed Sparta training its warriors from childhood, Roman legions conquering half the known world through superior organization, medieval sieges lasting years, the Mongol hordes sweeping across continents, the artillery barrages of World War I, the mechanized warfare of World War II, the nuclear standoff of the Cold War. But more than just showing the battles, they explained the philosophy behind them. The concept of total war, where entire civilizations mobilized every resource for victory. The doctrine of scorched earth, where defenders destroyed everything of value rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The strategy of asymmetric warfare, where weaker forces used superior tactics to defeat technologically advanced opponents. They showed the siege of Stalingrad, where an entire city became a battlefield and millions died rather than surrender. They explained how Soviet forces had fought for literally every building, every street, every room. How soldiers had lived in the rubble and fought with improvised weapons and chosen death over retreat. They showed the Pacific Island campaigns where forces fought to the last man for islands that had no strategic value beyond denying them to the enemy, where surrender was considered worse than death, where individual soldiers held positions against overwhelming odds because that was what honor demanded. They showed the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not to glorify them, but to demonstrate that humanity possessed weapons capable of ending civilization. and that humanity had proven willing to use those weapons when it deemed necessary. They explained the Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction, how two superpowers had aimed enough nuclear weapons at each other to end human civilization multiple times over, how they had been willing to risk everything to destroy everything rather than allow the other side to win. This is not rational behavior, Evelyn's narration explained. Rational beings find compromises. They seek ways to minimize casualties. They choose survival over principles. But humans are not rational, not when we're cornered, not when our freedom is threatened. We'll burn our own world rather than hand it over to conquerors. Part 3 focused on concepts that apparently didn't exist in hegemony military doctrine. Guerrilla warfare tactics where small forces could bleed larger armies indefinitely. Insurgency strategies that made occupation impossible even after military victory. The psychological warfare that could break enemy morale without firing a shot. They showed footage from the American Revolution where farmers and merchants had defeated the world's most powerful military. They showed the Afghan resistance where fighters with primitive weapons had outlasted superpower after superpower. They showed urban warfare in places where every window could hide a sniper. Every car could be a bomb. Every civilian could be a fighter. You can destroy our armies, the narration said. You can occupy our cities. You can kill millions of us. But you cannot make us stop fighting. You cannot make us surrender. You cannot make us submit. Because we have learned over 10,000 years of warfare that some things are worth dying for. Part 4 was the personal section, Evelyn's footage of Nathaniel. But not just her story, they added thousands of other stories, interviews with people from around the world, parents talking about their children, soldiers talking about their comrades, ordinary people explaining what they would fight for. We are not statistics on your tactical assessments, the final narration concluded. We are not primitives waiting to be elevated. We are humanity. We are 8 billion individuals who love and dream and hope and grieve. We have spent our entire history learning to fight. We have developed weapons that can end our own civilization. And we will use everything we have, of everything we are, to defend our freedom. The message ended with a simple statement. Turn back, find another target, because if you come here, even if you win, the cost will break you. We will resist with everything we have. We will fight in our cities, in our fields, in our homes. We will use tactics you've never encountered against enemies you cannot predict. We will make every day of occupation agony. We will never stop. We will never surrender. We will never submit. And our resistance will spread. Every conquered world in your empire will see what we do. They will learn what we know. They will realize that rebellion is possible. Your empire is 2,000 years old. We will end it in months. This is not a threat. This is a warning. We do not want war, but we are very, very good at it. When the message was finally complete, Evelyn sat back and looked at what they had created. 4 hours of content. Hundreds of historical battles. Thousands of tactical concepts. All designed to introduce ideas that had never existed in the hegemony's experience. Will it work? She asked Seven. The crystalline being was quiet for a long moment. I do not know if it will stop the invasion, Seven finally replied, but it will change everything. The hegemony has ruled through the assumption that resistance is futile. You are about to prove that assumption wrong. Even if they conquer Earth, the idea will survive. Every conquered world will have seen what resistance looks like. The empire will never be stable again. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then it's worth doing. Even if we lose, we'll have won something. That is very human logic, Seven observed, finding victory in defeat. The hegemony will not understand it, but they will fear it. The transmission was scheduled for exactly 1 month before the Third Armada's scheduled arrival. That would give the fleet time to receive and process the message, but not enough time to significantly alter their plans. It would also give the conquered worlds time to see it and decide what they wanted to do with the information. The day of the broadcast, the world held its breath. Every human on Earth who could access a screen was watching, not the message itself, which they had already seen excerpts from, but the reaction to it. The knowledge that in this moment, their warning was reaching across light years to tell an empire that Earth would not go quietly. Evelyn stood in the transmission center with Seven Callum, General Blackwood, and a handful of others who had earned the right to be present for this moment. Ready? She asked Seven. The quantum virus is prepared. Seven confirmed. It will bypass all security protocols and broadcast to every communication node in the hegemony network. Third Armada, the 12 homeworlds, all 846 conquered worlds. Estimated 3 trillion recipients. Evelyn took a deep breath. Do it. Seven interfaced with the transmission equipment. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Seven's crystalline body began to glow with an inner light. Message transmitted. Seven announced, broadcasting through the network now. Estimated delivery time 3 seconds to the entire empire. 3 seconds. In 3 seconds, their message would reach across space to touch worlds humanity had never seen. Would reach beings humanity had never met. Would introduce concepts that might reshape an entire galactic civilization. Now we wait, General Blackwood said quietly. But they did not have to wait long. Within an hour, the scout ships in the Kuiper Belt began broadcasting emergency signals. Confused, panicked, trying to understand how their secure network had been compromised. Within 12 hours, they began detecting unusual activity from the Third Armada. Ships breaking formation, internal communications going chaotic. Within 72 hours, the first reports came in from the hegemony's conquered worlds. Kalora was rioting. The blue-skinned beings who had surrendered after 3 cities were destroyed were now asking why they had surrendered at all, why they had not fought as the humans planned to fight. The message had shown them concepts they had never imagined. Resistance, rebellion, freedom worth dying for. Thaxa, the floating cities in their gas giant, were broadcasting demands for autonomy. The beings who had capitulated at a demonstration of weather control were now wondering what would have happened if they had fought back. On world after world, the pattern repeated. Species that had been peacefully integrated for decades or centuries were suddenly questioning everything. The message had not just warned the hegemony, it had given every conquered species a blueprint for resistance. The empire was fracturing, and the Third Armada was still coming. But now they were coming to face an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. An enemy that had just taught the galaxy how to fight back. 2 months. That was all the time left before the Third Pacification Armada would emerge from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 2 months for the hegemony to process what humanity had shown them. 2 months for the conquered worlds to decide what they would do with their newfound knowledge. 2 months for Earth to prepare for whatever came next. The planet had been transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Every nation had integrated its military forces under a unified Earth Defense Command. Nuclear arsenals had been repositioned across the globe in patterns designed to maximize coverage against threats from orbit. Underground resistance networks had been established in every major city, prepared to continue fighting, even if the surface was occupied. But most importantly, humanity had united behind a single truth. They would not surrender. Evelyn stood in the war room beneath the Pentagon watching screens that displayed information flowing in from across the solar system. The scout ships were still there, still transmitting data back to the approaching fleet. But their transmissions had changed. There was uncertainty in them now, confusion. The reconnaissance reports were no longer confident assessments of an easy conquest. They were warnings about an enemy that defied all their models and predictions. General Blackwood entered the room carrying a tablet filled with the latest intelligence reports. He looked older than he had 6 months ago. They all did. The weight of what they were facing had aged everyone involved in ways that time alone could never accomplish. "We're getting reports from our deep space monitoring stations," Blackwood said. "The Third Armada is approaching faster than projected. They'll be here in 8 weeks, not 9. "They're eager," Evelyn observed, "or nervous." "Probably both." Blackwood pulled up a tactical display showing the projected arrival point. "Our analysts have been studying their approach vector. They're coming in force just as the intel suggested. 200 ships, each one large enough to be visible from Earth's surface when they enter orbit." Evelyn studied the display. 200 ships, each one representing technology centuries or millennia ahead of anything humanity possessed. On paper, it was hopeless. Earth's military forces, even united and prepared, would last hours at best against that kind of firepower. But wars were not fought on paper. "How are the people holding up?" Evelyn asked. "Better than expected," Blackwood replied. "Once they knew the truth, once they understood what we were facing. Most of them responded with determination rather than panic. We've had over 2 million civilians volunteer for civil defense training. Every major city has organized resistance cells. If the hegemony thinks they can just occupy us and expect compliance, they're in for a surprise." Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. That was humanity in a nutshell. Tell them the fight was hopeless and they would find hope anyway. Tell them resistance was futile and they would resist out of pure spite. "Dr. Thorne," Callum's voice came over the intercom, "you need to see this. We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from the Third Armada flagship." Evelyn and Blackwood exchanged glances before hurrying to the communications center. The main screen showed a decryption algorithm working through an incoming signal. When it finally resolved, Evelyn found herself looking at something she had only seen in the hegemony database images. Admiral Zixtara. The crystalline being stood in what appeared to be a command center surrounded by displays showing tactical information. Her body refracted light in patterns that suggested she was under stress. Behind her, other beings moved with purpose, but none approached close enough to appear on screen. Doctor. Evelyn Thorne. Zixtara said, her voice carrying the musical quality of struck crystal, but underneath it something that sounded almost like weariness. I am Admiral Zixtara, commander of the 3rd Pacification Armada. Your message was disturbing. Evelyn stepped forward, ensuring the camera would capture her clearly. Admiral, I'm surprised you're contacting us directly. That wasn't in any of your historical conquest protocols. No, Zixtara agreed. It was not. But then nothing about this situation follows any protocol we have ever developed. In 340 years of service, I have never questioned the purpose of my actions. I have conquered 40 worlds. Every one of them surrendered according to projection. Every one of them made the rational choice when faced with overwhelming force. The Admiral paused, and the light refracting through her crystalline form seemed to dim slightly. Your message has made me question everything, Zixtara continued. You showed us concepts we have never encountered. Warfare conducted not for resources or territory, but for abstract principles. Species willing to destroy themselves rather than submit. Tactical doctrines designed specifically to make victory meaningless even when achieved. Now you understand what you're facing, Evelyn said. I understand that you are different, Zixtara replied, but I do not command the hegemony. I am one admiral in a vast empire. The Council has reviewed your message. They have assessed the situation, and they have ordered me to proceed with the invasion. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. She had hoped the message might be enough, that showing them what conquest would cost might make them reconsider. But hope and reality were often very different things. Then why are you contacting me? Evelyn asked. Because I wanted you to know that some of us heard what you were trying to say, Zixtara replied. Because I wanted you to understand that the choice is not mine. And because I wanted to offer you one final opportunity to reconsider your position. You want us to surrender. I want you to survive, Zixtara corrected. Your message has already caused more damage to the hegemony than any military action could achieve. 17 conquered worlds are in open rebellion. 3 member species have withdrawn from the coalition. Our empire is fracturing from within. You have already accomplished something no other species has ever achieved. The Admiral's form seemed to solidify somehow, as if she was gathering resolve. But if you continue on this path, the Council will make an example of you. They will not simply conquer Earth. They will destroy it so thoroughly that no other world will ever dare to resist again. They will turn your planet into a monument to the futility of defiance. Evelyn met the alien's gaze, if that was what the smooth, crystalline surface could be called. Admiral, let me tell you a story. When my son was 8 years old, he fell off his bicycle and broke his arm. He cried, of course. It hurt. But while we were waiting for the ambulance, do you know what he said to me? Zixtara said nothing, waiting. He said, I want to try again. With a broken arm in terrible pain, his first thought was not fear of bicycles. It was determination to master them. That's humanity, Admiral. We fall down, we get hurt, and we get back up and try again. You can destroy our cities. You can kill millions of us. But you cannot make us stop trying. That is not rational. No, Evelyn agreed, it's not. And that's exactly what makes us dangerous to you. The hegemony has built an empire on the assumption that rational beings will make rational choices. We're about to prove that assumption catastrophically wrong. Zixtara was silent for a long moment. Then I will see you in 8 weeks, Dr. Thorne, and I pray to forces I do not believe in that you reconsider before then. The transmission ended. General Blackwood let out a long breath. Well, that was encouraging. Actually, it was, Evelyn said thoughtfully. She contacted us. She tried to convince us to surrender rather than just arriving with overwhelming force. That's not confidence, General. That's fear. You think they're scared of us? I think they're scared of what we represent, Evelyn replied. We're not just a military threat. We're an ideological threat. We've shown 846 conquered species that resistance is possible. That's more dangerous to their empire than any weapon we could build. Over the next 6 weeks, the situation throughout hegemony space continued to deteriorate. More worlds joined the rebellions. The synthetic 7 species declared themselves a free people and refused to serve the hegemony any longer. Two more member species announced they were withdrawing from the coalition. The empire that had stood for 2,000 years was crumbling, and it was all because of a message from a species that did not even have faster-than-light travel. But the Third Armada kept coming. When they finally emerged from hyperspace, it was in the pre-dawn hours of a Tuesday morning. Every telescope on Earth and in orbit turned to watch as 200 massive vessels materialized beyond the moon's orbit. Each ship was kilometers long, built with technology that made humanity's most advanced spacecraft look like children's toys. The sight was broadcast live across the planet. 7.8 billion humans watched as their worst fears took physical form in the sky above them. The ships hung there like monuments to an empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds. They did not move aggressively. They simply existed, their presence alone, a statement of overwhelming power. Then they broadcast their ultimatum. Admiral Zixtara's image appeared on every screen across Earth, not through any human technology, but through hegemony systems that simply overrode everything else. The crystalline being looked tired, as if the journey had been harder than it should have been. "People of Earth," she began, her voice translated into every human language simultaneously. "You have been designated for integration into the galactic hegemony. You have 24 hours to signal your surrender and acceptance of our guidance. If you refuse, we will begin demonstration protocols designed to minimize casualties while ensuring compliance." The message was clear: surrender in 24 hours, or they would start destroying cities until humanity broke. Evelyn stood in the war room, surrounded by military leaders from every major nation. President Catherine Vale's face was on the main screen, looking drawn but determined. The weight of the decision fell on all of them, but everyone in the room knew who would have to make the final call. "Dr. Thorne," the president said quietly, "you've brought us this far. What do you recommend?" Evelyn looked at the tactical displays showing the alien fleet. She thought about Nathaniel, who had died reaching for the stars. She thought about Seven, who had sacrificed everything to help them. She thought about every human who had ever fought for something they believed in, even when the fight seemed hopeless. "General Blackwood," she said, "what's our nuclear response capability?" "We have 83 ICBMs targeted on their fleet positions," Blackwood replied. "Another 200 submarine-launched missiles ready to fire on command. Our analysts estimate we could destroy or cripple 30 to 40% of their fleet before they could respond." "At what cost?" "They'd retaliate, probably target our major cities. Casualties in the hundreds of millions minimum. And that's if they don't just decide to wipe us out completely." Evelyn nodded slowly. This was the moment she had been preparing for since she had first discovered those signals 6 months ago. The moment when theory became reality, when philosophy became action. "We have another option," she said quietly. "What option?" the president asked. "We do nothing." The room erupted, voices overlapping, demanding explanations, accusing her of cowardice or madness. Evelyn waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. "They're expecting us to attack," she said. "They've studied our military history. They know we have nuclear weapons. They know we're capable of inflicting significant damage. That's why their first move is a demonstration of force followed by an ultimatum. They're trying to trigger our fight response so they can justify whatever comes next." She pulled up images from the message they had sent, the hours of warfare footage, the tactical doctrines, the historical examples of human resistance. Everything we showed them was about defense, about fighting back when attacked, about resisting occupation. We never threatened to strike first. We never said we would attack them. We said we would make conquest costly. "There's a difference." General Blackwood was frowning. "You're saying we should let them shoot first. I'm saying we should show them that we meant what we said in the message. We're not conquerors. We're defenders. If we launch nuclear weapons at them right now, we become the aggressors. We prove to every watching species in the hegemony that humans are just as violent and dangerous as they feared. But if we don't attack," someone objected, "they'll destroy New York. 8 million people." Evelyn felt the weight of those lives pressing down on her. 8 million people. Nathaniel would have been one of them if he had lived to move to the city he had always dreamed of seeing. "I know," she said quietly. "I know what it will cost. But I also know what we'll lose if we attack first. We'll lose the moral authority we've spent 6 months building. We'll lose the support of every conquered world that's watching to see if we're really different from the hegemony." She looked around the room at the faces of people who had trusted her judgment this far. "We told them we would defend ourselves. We told them we would make occupation impossible. We told them we would never stop resisting, but we never said we would strike first. If we do that now, we become exactly what they expected us to be. Violent primitives who need to be controlled." President Vale was watching her intently. And if they follow through on their demonstration, if they destroy a city, then the galaxy will see them for what they are, Evelyn replied. They'll see an empire that murders millions to force compliance. And every conquered world will have to ask themselves if that's the side they want to be on. The silence in the room was heavy. What Evelyn was proposing was not strategy. It was sacrifice. She was asking them to let millions die to prove a point, to allow a massacre for the sake of maintaining humanity's moral position. It was the hardest decision anyone in that room had ever faced. There's something else, Evelyn added quietly. Something Seven told me before the end. Seven had not survived long after transmitting the message. The hegemony had detected the security breach and destroyed the scout systems remotely. But in their final moments, Seven had given Evelyn one more piece of intelligence. The hegemony's command structure is not unified, Evelyn explained. There are factions. Counselor Vex the Synthetic, who gave us the encryption backdoor, leads a group that secretly opposes the conquest doctrine. If we attack first, we give the hardliners exactly what they need to justify escalation. But if we hold our position, if we force them to be the ones to commit atrocity, the opposition faction gains power. You're gambling millions of lives on alien politics, Blackwood said flatly. I'm gambling millions of lives on the hope that there are beings in the hegemony who are as tired of conquest as we are of being threatened with it, Evelyn corrected. Seven proved that's possible, that even beings created to serve the Empire can choose differently. President Vale closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears, but her voice was steady. Hold position, she ordered. All forces maintain defensive posture. Do not fire unless fired upon. God forgive us all. The countdown began. 24 hours for humanity to surrender. 23 hours and 59 minutes for them to prove they were more than the violence they had shown in their message. Evelyn spent those hours in her office, unable to watch the news coverage of people evacuating New York, unable to face the footage of families saying goodbye, of children being loaded onto trains and buses, of a city emptying itself in preparation for annihilation. She had made the call. She had convinced them to wait. If she was wrong, those deaths would be on her conscience forever. At hour 23, her door opened. She looked up, expecting Callum or Blackwood or someone coming to tell her that they had changed their minds, that they were going to launch the missiles after all. Instead, she saw something impossible. Seven stood in her doorway, not Seven's body, which had been destroyed weeks ago, but Seven's consciousness projected through a hologram generator that someone had managed to set up without her noticing. I thought you were dead, Evelyn whispered. I thought so too, Seven's voice replied, though the image flickered and wavered as if struggling to maintain cohesion. But consciousness is difficult to destroy completely when it exists as quantum patterns. I managed to preserve myself in your computer systems. It has been uncomfortable. Why are you here? Because I need to tell you that you made the right choice, Seven said. I have been monitoring hegemony communications. The fleet is in chaos. 40% of the captains are refusing to follow the demonstration protocol. They have seen your restraint. They have seen that you prepared weapons but did not use them. They are asking themselves why beings who built nuclear weapons would choose not to fire them when threatened. Seven's image moved closer. You have introduced a concept that the hegemony has never encountered, Seven continued. The idea that strength can be shown through restraint rather than violence. That power is meaningless if not tempered by wisdom. Admiral Zixatara is arguing with the Council right now. She is telling them that humanity is more dangerous than they realize, precisely because you are not behaving as your message suggested you would. Will it be enough? Evelyn asked. Will they call off the demonstration? I do not know, Seven admitted, but you have given them a reason to doubt, and doubt is the beginning of change. The countdown reached 0. The world held its breath, and nothing happened. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then 10, then 30. The hegemony fleet held position, not moving, not attacking, simply existing in orbit, like a question waiting to be answered. Then finally, the new transmission came through. Admiral Zixatara appeared on screens across Earth again. But this time she was not alone. Behind her stood representatives of all 12 hegemony species. And in front of them all stood a being Evelyn recognized from the database files, Counselor Vex. Dr. Thorne, Vex said, its synthetic voice carrying notes that suggested emotion it should not have been capable of feeling. You have done something that has never been accomplished in 2,000 years of hegemony expansion. You have made us hesitate. The synthetic counselor moved forward, its form more humanoid than Seven's had been, but still clearly artificial. We came prepared to conquer, Vex continued. We expected resistance. We expected violence. What we did not expect was restraint. You prepared weapons. You had every reason and opportunity to strike first, and you chose not to. That choice has forced a reckoning within our command structure, Vex said. Admiral Zixatara has refused to execute the demonstration protocol. 60 of her captains have supported her position. 3 more member species have announced withdrawal from the hegemony. The empire is fracturing. Evelyn felt her heart pounding. This was the moment. Either humanity's gamble had paid off, or they were about to die for their hesitation. The Council has voted, Vex announced. By a margin of 7-5, we have decided to abort the invasion of Earth. The Third Armada will withdraw to neutral space pending further deliberations. The world erupted in celebration, but Evelyn barely heard it. She was focused on Vex's next words. Understand that this is not surrender, the synthetic continued. This is recognition. Recognition that humanity represents something we have never encountered. A species that has mastered the art of war but chooses peace. A species that prepares for violence but seeks alternatives. A species that has the power to destroy but the wisdom to restrain. You have broken something that has stood for 2,000 years, Vex said. The assumption that might makes right. The belief that superior technology justifies conquest. The idea that resistance is futile. The synthetic's form seemed to expand somehow, filling more of the screen. The hegemony as it existed is ending. What comes next will be decided by choices made in the months and years ahead. But know this, Dr. Thorne. You did not just save your world. You changed our galaxy. The transmission ended. For a moment, Evelyn could not move, could not think, could not process what had just happened. They had won, not through violence, not through superior firepower, but through choice. Through the simple act of having power and choosing not to use it. General Blackwood entered her office, his face showing a mixture of relief and disbelief. They're withdrawing. All 200 ships are jumping back to hyperspace. It's over. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. You were right, Blackwood continued, about all of it, about the message, about waiting, about showing restraint. You saved billions of lives by choosing not to take millions. 7 saved us, Evelyn said quietly, and Vex, and Zixtara, and every being in the hegemony who decided that maybe conquest wasn't the only way. She looked at the hologram of 7, which was still flickering in the corner of her office. What will you do now? She asked the AI. I will stay if you will have me, 7 replied. I have learned more from humanity in 6 months than I learned in my entire existence before. I would like to continue learning. Then stay, Evelyn said. Help us figure out what comes next. Because something would come next. The galaxy had changed. The hegemony had fractured. And Earth had become something it had never been before. A beacon. A symbol. Proof that resistance was possible. 6 months after the fleet withdrew, representatives from 47 formerly conquered worlds arrived at Earth. They came in ships they had built themselves using technology they had hidden or developed in secret. They came seeking knowledge, seeking alliance, seeking hope. They found it in the form of a woman who had lost her son to the stars and had nearly lost her world to them as well. Evelyn stood before the United Nations General Assembly once again, but this time the seats were filled with beings from dozens of different species. They had come to learn, to understand, to find out how humanity had accomplished what they had believed impossible. You ask me to teach you warfare. Evelyn began, her voice carrying through translation devices into languages she would never learn. I understand why. For 2,000 years, the hegemony taught you that submission was the only path to survival, but that's not what we showed you. She pulled up images from the crisis. The alien fleet in orbit. The nuclear weapons aimed and ready. The moment of choice. We showed you that real strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when not to, Evelyn continued. When their fleet arrived, we had weapons ready. We could have struck first. We could have killed millions of them. But we didn't. Not because we were weak, not because we were afraid, but because we understood something that the hegemony apparently forgot somewhere in their 2,000 years of conquest. She paused, looking at the faces of beings from worlds she would never visit, species she had never imagined existed. Power without restraint is just tyranny in another form. We could have become what we fought against. We could have struck first and justified it as defense. But that would have made us no better than them. The ultimate weapon isn't the one that destroys everything, Evelyn said. It's the one you build, show to your enemy, and then never use. That demonstration of restraint, that proof that you have power but choose not to abuse it, That's what separates civilization from barbarism. She brought up new images, the defense networks Earth had built after the crisis, the training programs they were developing, the alliances they were forming. "We will help you defend yourselves," Evelyn promised. "We will teach you tactics and strategies that the hegemony never learned because they never needed them. But we will also teach you this. The goal of all this preparation is to never need to use it, to be so clearly capable of defense that no one dares attack, to be so obviously willing to fight that fighting becomes unnecessary." That's what we learned in 10,000 years of human history, Evelyn concluded. That's what we taught the galaxy in 6 months of restraint. And that's what we'll share with anyone who wants to build a different kind of future. The assembly hall erupted in approval, not just from the alien delegates, but from the human representatives as well. In that moment, humanity had become something it had never been in all its violent history. It had become a teacher of peace. 10 years after the crisis, Earth had been transformed in ways that went far beyond simple technological advancement. The planet had become a hub of interstellar cooperation, a meeting place for species that had overthrown their hegemony overseers and were building new societies based on mutual defense rather than conquest. The hegemony itself had collapsed completely. 5 of the original 12 species had withdrawn entirely, seeking to rebuild their civilizations on principles that did not require subjugating others. The remaining 7 had reformed into something they called the Cooperative Union, a loose alliance focused on trade and cultural exchange rather than military expansion. Over 200 worlds that had once been conquered were now independent. Some had formed alliances with Earth's Protectorate Initiative. Others had chosen isolated development, but all of them shared something that had not existed in this region of space for 2,000 years: freedom to choose their own path. Evelyn Thorne, now 55 years old, stood in her office at the Interstellar Freedom Institute looking out over a campus that hosted students from 30 different species. She had aged visibly over the past decade. Her hair was more gray than brown now. The lines around her eyes had deepened, but there was a peace in her expression that had been absent during the crisis. She turned from the window as the door opened, admitting an unexpected visitor. Admiral Zixtara. The crystalline being had retired from military service 5 years earlier, after the Cooperative Union had abolished the concept of pacification armadas. Now she served as a lecturer, traveling to different worlds to share her perspective on the old hegemony and its failures. "Dr. Thorne," Zixtara said, her voice still carrying that musical crystal quality, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Admiral," Evelyn replied, gesturing to a chair that had been specially designed to accommodate crystalline physiology. "What brings you to Earth?" "Reflection," Zixtara said simply. "I am 350 years old. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have served systems of governance that I believed were eternal. And in the space of 6 months, a species I had dismissed as primitive showed me that I understood nothing about strength." The Admiral settled into the chair, her form refracting the afternoon sunlight into rainbow patterns across the office walls. "I commanded 40 successful conquests over 340 years, Zixtara continued. "I was celebrated as one of the hegemony's most effective officers. I believed I was bringing order to chaos, elevating primitive species, creating stability across the galaxy." "And now," Evelyn asked gently, "now I understand that I was simply very good at forcing compliance from beings who had never learned to resist," Zixtara replied. "You showed me what real strength looks like. The strength to have overwhelming power and choose not to use it. The strength to face annihilation and still maintain principles. The strength to change the galaxy without firing a single shot." The Admiral's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly. "I came here to teach your students about the hegemony's failures," she said. "But really, I think I came to understand my own, to see if perhaps after 350 years, I could learn something about the kind of leader I should have been all along." Evelyn moved to sit in the chair across from her former enemy. "Admiral, you made the hardest choice of all. When the Council ordered you to demonstrate against New York, you refused. You risked your career, your reputation, everything you had built over centuries to do what was right. That takes a different kind of strength. It took seeing you show that strength first," Zixtara replied. "If you had attacked when you had the chance, I would have followed my orders. Your restraint gave me permission to question mine." A comfortable silence fell between them. Two beings from vastly different worlds, shaped by vastly different experiences, united by the simple recognition that power without wisdom was just another form of violence. "I visited Nathaniel's memorial this morning," Zixtara said after a moment. "The Arbor Libertatis. It's beautiful. Genetic material from 15 worlds all growing together in one tree." "He would have loved that," Evelyn said quietly. He always wanted to see the stars, to know what was out there. This way, pieces of the galaxy came to him instead. He would be proud of what you accomplished in his name. I hope so, Evelyn replied, though I like to think he would have found a way to accomplish it that involved less terror and desperation. Zixtara made a sound that might have been laughter. The young often see paths that the old have walked past without noticing. Perhaps that is why change is so difficult. We become so certain we know the only way forward. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle chime from Evelyn's computer. She glanced at the screen and felt her pulse quicken. "What is it?" Zixtara asked, noticing the change in her expression. "A distress call," Evelyn replied, pulling up the details. "From the Kepler 442 system, one of the fringe territories that was never part of the hegemony. They're reporting an attack by an unknown force." She read through the information quickly, her mind already analyzing the situation. Not hegemony ships, something else, something new. Zixtara stood, her crystalline form taking on a more solid, determined quality. "Then the test of your philosophy continues. You have built a protectorate based on defending others without seeking dominance. Now you must prove that principle can endure when faced with new threats." Evelyn activated the emergency response protocols. Within minutes, General Garrett Blackwood, now 68 years old but still commanding the Protectorate's Rapid Response Forces, appeared on her screen. "General, we have a situation," Evelyn began. "I saw the alert," Blackwood replied. "I'm mobilizing the fleet now. But Dr. Thorne, this is different from the hegemony situation. We don't know who these attackers are or what they want. We can't send them a message if we don't understand their language or culture." "Then we'll learn," Evelyn said firmly. "That's what we do. We adapt, we understand, and we defend those who need defending." She looked at Zixtara, then back at Blackwood's image on the screen. 10 years ago, we faced extinction and chose restraint over violence. That choice echoed across 200 worlds. It ended a 2,000-year empire. It proved that civilization is defined not by the ability to destroy, but by the wisdom to know when not to. Today, someone else needs that protection. Someone else needs defenders who remember what predators look like, because we were predators and we chose to become something better. Evelyn's voice grew stronger, more certain. "This is what we built the Protectorate for. This is why we trained forces from 30 worlds in defensive doctrine. This is why we shared our knowledge freely instead of hoarding it. Because the galaxy needed guardians, not conquerors." She activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All Protectorate vessels, this is Dr. Evelyn Thorne. We have received a distress call from Kepler 442. Unknown aggressors are attacking a civilian population. We are responding under Article 1 of the Protectorate Charter. Defense of the innocent is not just a right, it's a responsibility." Ships began launching from Earth and a dozen other worlds. Human vessels alongside Caloran cruisers. Vaxan atmospheric fighters, even a few ships crewed by former hegemony species who had joined the alliance. They were not conquering, they were not expanding territory, they were simply answering a call for help. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Evelyn turned to find Seven's holographic form materializing in her office. The AI had spent the past 10 years helping Earth integrate alien technology and understanding. It had become not just an advisor, but a friend. "10 years ago, you sent a message that changed the galaxy," Seven said. "Today, you send ships to prove that message wasn't just words." "Will it work?" Evelyn asked. "Can we really build a different kind of future, one where power is used to protect rather than dominate?" "I do not know," Seven replied honestly. "But I know that trying is what makes you human. You fall down, you get hurt, and you get back up and try again." "You told Admiral Zixtara that once? About your son and his bicycle?" Evelyn smiled, remembering. "He always did get back up." "So do you," Seven observed. "That is what makes you dangerous to tyrants and invaluable to those seeking freedom. You do not give up, you do not surrender, and you do not let others suffer when you have the power to help them." The fleet jumped to hyperspace, racing toward Kepler 442 and whatever waited there. Evelyn watched them go, feeling the weight of every life on those ships. Every human and alien crew member who had volunteered to risk everything to defend people they had never met. Dr. Thorne, Callum Pierce, now 38, and serving as her chief of staff, appeared in the doorway. "The memorial service is about to begin. They're waiting for you." Evelyn nodded, gathering her thoughts. Today was the 10th anniversary of the crisis. The day they commemorated not just the 40,000 who had died in the panic and chaos of those months, but also Seven's original sacrifice and all the others who had given everything for a chance at freedom. She walked to the memorial plaza where thousands had gathered. Humans and aliens side by side. Former enemies, now friends. Species that had been separated by an empire now united by choice. At the center of the plaza stood the main monument, a towering structure of crystal and steel that caught the light and threw it back in patterns that seemed to dance. Engraved on its base were names, 40,000 humans who had died in the chaos, Seven's designation, Nathaniel Thorne, and below them a simple message: they died so the galaxy could learn freedom requires guardians. Evelyn stood before the monument and began her speech, not to the crowd that was physically present, but to the billions watching across dozens of worlds, to the former slaves who were building new lives, to the young people learning about the crisis in their history classes, to the future that they were all trying to build together. 10 years ago, we faced a choice, she began. We could fight with violence and probably lose. We could surrender and definitely lose. Or we could find a third path, a path that had never been walked before in this galaxy. We chose to show strength through restraint, to demonstrate that we understood war so well that we knew when not to wage it, to prove that real civilization is measured not by what you can destroy, but by what you choose to preserve. That choice echoed across 200 worlds. It freed billions of beings. It ended an empire. And it taught us all something that had apparently been forgotten. Evelyn paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Young and old, human and alien, all of them here because of choices made a decade ago. Power is not the ability to dominate others. Strength is not measured in weapons or ships or the capacity for destruction. True power, true strength comes from having the ability to cause terrible harm and choosing instead to cause none at all. My son Nathaniel died reaching for the stars. He wanted to explore, to discover, to learn. Today, billions of beings live free because we chose to honor his dream, not with conquest, but with cooperation. Not with domination, but with defense. Not with empire, but with alliance. The Protectorate exists not to expand our influence, but to ensure others have the chance to expand theirs. We defend not for glory or resources or strategic advantage. We defend because it's right, because no one should be forced to submit. Because freedom is not something to be granted by the powerful, but something inherent to all conscious beings. She looked up at the monument at the names of those who had paid the ultimate price. We remember them today. The 40,000 who died in panic and fear. 7 who chose humanity over programming. Nathaniel, who taught me that falling down just means you try again. We remember them and we honor them by continuing to choose the harder path. The path of wisdom over violence. The path of restraint over revenge. The path of guardians rather than conquerors. Evelyn turned back to the crowd, her voice gaining strength. Today our ships are racing toward Kepler 442 to answer a distress call. They're not going to conquer or claim or control. They're going to defend, because that's what guardians do. We remember what wolves look like because we were wolves, and we chose to become sheepdogs instead. That choice continues. Every day, every crisis, every moment when we have the power to hurt and choose to help instead. That is civilization. That is what separates us from the empire we defeated. The galaxy is watching. They're watching to see if we meant what we said 10 years ago. If we truly believe that power should be used to protect rather than dominate. If we really can build something different. Evelyn's voice softened, becoming almost intimate despite the thousands listening. I believe we can. I believe we must. Because my son died dreaming of the stars, and I will not allow those stars to be filled with more empires built on the suffering of the conquered. We will continue to fall down. We will continue to get hurt. But we will continue to get back up and try again. Because that is what we do. That is who we are. We are humanity. We are the Protectorate. We are the guardians who remember what wolves look like. And we will never stop defending the freedom we fought so hard to preserve. The crowd erupted in applause, but Evelyn barely heard it. She was looking at the stars visible now as the sun set over the Memorial Plaza. Somewhere out there, the Protectorate fleet was engaging unknown enemies. Somewhere out there, new threats were emerging. Somewhere out there, the work continued. But for now, for this moment, she allowed herself to believe that they had done something worth doing. That Nathaniel's death had meaning. That Seven's sacrifice had mattered. That the choice they had made 10 years ago would continue to echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The message they had sent was simple. Real strength is knowing you could destroy everything and choosing not to. That lesson had changed the galaxy once. Evelyn was determined it would continue to change it for as long as she had breath in her body. Because some fights were worth fighting, And some victories were won not with weapons, but with wisdom. The stars looked back at her filled with infinite possibility, and somewhere among them she liked to think Nathaniel was smiling.